Good evening. Welcome to the Beer and Culture on Lit I-5. Yay! Thank you all. Thank the throng for coming out tonight. You can see how much excitement there is around this. We have a few people to introduce really quickly. I'll start. I'm Dave Allen. I'm the co-president of Allied Arts of Seattle. If you're not familiar with us, we've been around since the 1950s. We're a civic group that promotes a vibrant arts community and great public spaces. We like to see ourselves as setting and leading the debate and changing the conversation. So if you look in our past, you can see where we got the idea rolling about saving the Pike Place Market and preserving Pioneer Square. And when the viaduct needed to come down after the earthquake, and WashDOT, of course, was going to replace the elevated highway with a bigger and uglier and awfuler highway on our waterfront, a few people, Allied Arts, said, what if we didn't have a viaduct on the waterfront? What would that be like? What if we had a waterfront for all and it was wonderful and amazing? And so that wasn't going to happen. Yay! That wasn't going to happen because that's crazy. But we stuck with it like the Lit I-5 folks are doing now. We stuck with it and we met with groups and we got the idea flowing. We had beer and culture events just like this to submit ideas and solicit ideas and get more people involved. We had charrettes to get drawings like this and images so people could see what it could be like. That's where the idea for the waterfront to connect Pike Place Market to the aquarium came, and that's what we see and enjoy now. And it just kept going and spread until it then moved to just such a groundswell that you couldn't ignore it. And it had to happen. The politicians got on board and the voters, and then of course the engineers and everyone to build what we are enjoying right out the door now today. If you could take a minute, like take 5 seconds to close your eyes and just think about how you feel when you're on our wonderful, wonderful waterfront.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of people to get there, but it started with a small group that said, what if? And now the world is that much more wonderful because of that. So thank you all for that. Now, the next big civic idea is Lidding I-5. And Allied Arts is so excited to collaborate with the Lit I-5 group and the Seattle Parks Foundation on this beer and culture series to do that, get this big idea solidified and spread to make it happen and make Seattle even more wonderful. So thank you. No.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shava Lawson from Seattle Parks Foundation, and we partner with community to champion equitable public spaces across the city. Similarly to what David talked about with the what ifs, there's a lot of community groups who are interested in doing a project and they have a what if question, and we help them with navigating the public process, getting funding, and managing to work with agencies. It's really exciting to be in partnership here tonight with everyone and to explore the funding that they received for $2 million to research and plan for Lidding I-5. As with many long-term projects, it takes a coalition or a group, massive perseverance. As you mentioned, it can be years. We've been a fiscal sponsor to Lit I-5 for 10 years. We are now gaining momentum, and having these conversations is going to help push it to the next level and move this forward. If you notice, there's some signs around the room tonight with QR codes. This $2 million does not fund the beer and culture events, so if you feel inclined to give, please do so. And thank you so much to Mithun for hosting. This is such a beautiful space. We're all so happy to be in here. And thanks to everyone for coming.
Good evening. My name is John Fite, and I am co-chair of the Lit I-5 Steering Committee. Lit I-5 began 10 years ago, and we have met with thousands of people, including supportive elected officials, public agencies, and advocacy organizations. We have built strong partnerships with Seattle's OPCD, the Washington State Department of Transportation, the Downtown Seattle Association, and the Seattle Parks Foundation. The LID is now included in the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, the Downtown Activation Plan, and the Statewide Transportation Plan. City Council resolutions were passed in 2022 and 2023 supporting the lid. We have fostered a massive neighborhood charrette in 2018, a technical feasibility study in 2020, and a WashDOT ramps relocation study in 2024. We have also hosted regular walking tours of the project site in Seattle area lids, as well as published a survey of other lids in America and the results from our 2018 charrette. And now there is the urban design vision, the federal and state grant funded work that will begin this year and is the focus of the Beer and Culture events. Since the $2.2 million grant was awarded, I have met with many of you in the audience. Those conversations inspired me and my colleagues and were the genesis of these events. It occurred to us that your insights and experiences must be shared and debated beyond the small team at Lid I-5 and OPCD, so that all of us would be better informed as to the project's potential, goals, and approach. The Beer and Culture events are a unique opportunity to bring these conversations to a larger audience and to consider the diversity of opinions we must have before we commit ourselves to the project's scope, execution, and deliverables. Tonight's topic, Defining a Vision, may be the most elusive of the three events, but we have an incredibly able panel to probe its potential. A vision is meant to inspire people to action, to inspire you, and the many more not in attendance to seize the moment and lead the discussion about the future of our city. How do we inspire each other to action? How do we kindle a fire in our collective body to dream big and follow those dreams with sustained action that achieves a better city for all of us? How do we translate words, drawings, models, and what other means necessary into results? How do we rekindle the ethos that gave us the Central Waterfront? The time for action is now, not only because of our grant money, but because the Washington State Department of Transportation is beginning a master plan for I-5 from British Columbia to Oregon. We have been told that the work undertaken with this grant money, work that will be catalyzed during these Beer and Culture events, will inform the master plan. So we're turning to you this evening to help lead the way. I would like to thank tonight's volunteers, Allied Arts Seattle, the Seattle Parks Foundation, Methuen, and the panelists for making this evening possible. And thank you for your support, and please stay engaged.
All right. Good to go? Everyone can hear me? Okay. Hello, I'm Dorothy Ferris, a partner and landscape architect here at Methuen, and thank you all for coming out this evening and joining us. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists and then jump into a series of questions. So I'll start immediately here on my right. Donna Moody, born in Jamaica and raised in Chicago and now a resident of Seattle. She's well acquainted with the interconnectedness of social justice, community building, and neighborhood activism. Her passion for service and bringing communities together presents itself in her work with the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. She serves on the Art Noir Board, the GRIS Board, the Seattle Foundation Board, and the Chamber Board, and she participates in the Central Area and the Capitol Hill Land Use Review Committees, and has served on several mayoral commissions and task force, and the Seattle Center Advisory Commission. And if that's not enough, she's also a restaurateur. If you didn't know that, Marjorie's, that was just featured on KUOW a couple days ago.
Thank you.
Ben Franz joined SOJ in 2017 after 15 years of leading two iconic historic destinations through major capital projects, new construction, and community revitalization efforts. As executive director of the Pike Place Market, Ben led the successful completion of a $68 million renovation of the historic market while maintaining operations for hundreds of small independent businesses. That's no small feat. Ben also fulfilled a 40-year-long vision to develop the last parcel in the market's historic district, and he helmed the $75 million market front project from concept through grand opening, including lease-up of commercial spaces and low-income housing. And interestingly, he has a degree in sculpture, which I'm sure really colors the way he sees the built environment. And finally, Shannon Nickel, a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects. She and her partners at GGN received the Smithsonian's 2011 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Landscape Architecture and the 2017 ASLA National recognized with the the 2017 ASLA National Landscape Architecture Firm Award. Her projects have been recognized with ASLA National Awards of Excellence, AIA Honor Awards, Tucker Design Awards, Great Places Awards, and the Environmental Design Research Association, and the Pacific Horticulture Inaugural Design Futurist Award. And I think she wins the award for best shoes in the building at the moment.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought I'd start us off with a discussion that kind of gets us generating some excitement. Here we are, 2025. In 1976, Free Park opened that set a precedent for healing the scars of highway building. There's now been scores of highway lids. What are some of the lessons that we can think about as we contemplate lidding I-5? And what would make this lidding so unique of the second quarter of this century? I'll maybe let Shannon start if you're up for that.
Well, my mind goes to the Big Dig lid in Boston, which I had the honor of working on in the North End Park section and learning from. And I think it really affected how I approach a lot of my work from that experience of being at the table. When we started the project, all the design teams were being asked to follow a priority for continuity along the length of the lid. I think it's 3.1 miles that we had in our minds to have continuity. As we kept going along and doing our community meetings, we realized that it was the crosswise direction and relationships of the immediately adjacent streets, neighborhoods, cultures, and how diverse they were from each other that needed to have more weight. Probably not as novel of an idea now, but watching that unfold in real time and watching the different agencies that had made certain promises at a regional scale to the state and wanting folks in the state, the constituents, to still see a big green thing that you could see from space that state money was paying for, while also being empathetic to these nuances that you can't see from space, but you see when you walk around that improve the quality of life for the people who lived within walking distance of the lid. That tension, I think, is still really relevant and something for us to think about in Seattle as we mature as a city and outgrow thinking that we need to do giant things that you can see for.
Ben, Donna, anything?
I was going to say, I think it's really important when you take on a project like lidding I-90 and when we consider what it would look like to lid I-5, that we don't just treat the project as completed when the open space has been created and we have green space and parks and canopies without programming the space and without having scheduled maintenance, and also making the programming intergenerational and very inclusive. It has to be inviting, it has to feel welcoming, it has to be something that the citizenry of the neighborhood and the project feel compelled to be stewards of and to continue the legacy. And I think that when we look at the wins or the failures of projects like this, we can usually look to spaces that have been neglected or not properly programmed or thoroughly thought out. It's not enough to just create it. It has to be programmed and planned and maintained and stewarded into something that people continually want to go to, feel safe being in the presence of, and does not feel exclusive to community members that might not look like us.
I'm just digesting what you just shared and the importance of not only having the vision, but that long-term sustainability. And I just want to highlight sort of two takeaways from two different projects that underscore sort of a fundamental imperative, I think, for anything like this. When you look at Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, right, that was singularly funded by one very committed philanthropic individual and family. And that's so critical to have that initial funding and that long-term funding. And then you look at Freeway Park. And Freeway Park, while it was largely a publicly funded civic effort, underneath the dirt there, it is a true public-private partnership. And actually, many of those leases that allow that space to function the way it does still exist today with those private partners. So my point is the value of that public-private partnership, right? The public can't do it without that civic engine, without that public civic engine and that commitment, that private civic engine and the commitment of those private entities. So that public-private partnership is such a key to the success here. I do want to take one moment and just go to the top here and acknowledge Allied Arts and the Seattle Parks Foundation. So Allied Arts, 20 plus years ago, started thinking about the waterfront and hasn't missed a beat in the importance of what happens next in our city with all of us here tonight, right? This incredible hunger. We're all here because we see the next big thing we can do in our city to remove scars and help us move forward. And then the Seattle Parks Foundation. How many of you now value parks way more than you did 3 years ago, right? Just about everybody. So we now understand much more fundamentally the importance of public open space. But I'll go back to the main point, that public-private partnership. I think every project you look at has that at its core, and that's hugely important to success.
That's great. Thank you all. I think 2 or 3, all of you maybe have mentioned the significant investments that have just been made in this series of linear open spaces along the waterfront. And everybody who's here tonight got to experience that on their way in, right? Which, as Ben has mentioned, is just a fantastic experience and fantastically programmed. It also capitalizes on this incredible borrowed landscape of the sound and the mountains beyond. So as we think about this lidded opportunity and the character of this uphill space, what are and the linear space along that whole lid, what can we capitalize on in this unique place in the topography of the city?
Well, I find it. Can I start again?
Yeah,
Since
please.
sorry, that one I'm excited about. But it's a really important juncture of topography for us to understand where we are, and there's a comfort and an excitement that we all sort of instinctively have if we can read what the ground is doing and then register when we encounter differences in the ground. That transect where I-5 was carved through it was two different things that are both really interesting. One thing that starts around where the new convention center addition is, wherever Mark is, um, that was the head of a ravine that um, drained out to the north towards South Lake Union Marsh, and a lot of you may know this. But there were bridges over that area, and some of the streets were sort of like raised boardwalks for quite a while, and a barrier of some sort and a change or um, some kind of little bit of an obstacle in the landscape of some sort can make life interesting. So the impulse to completely smooth and flush everything out, it's a noble impulse to make life easier, but the heritage of that place and the reason why I-5 was put through there was because the topography was a little weird and inconvenient, so a little slower to fully be developed out and valued. The second piece of topographical charisma is that that transect traces along the base of the two main hills there, the base of First Hill and the base of Capitol Hill, right where they kind of turned into some bluffs. First Hill had some bluffs. Even before I-5 was carved through, there were stairs and cliffs, and where Freeway Park is now. So that's pretty interesting. And if there was some way to perceive where those hills started and stopped and be able to perceive them as hip, perceive the bluffs as bluffs. I'm probably being cut off because I'm rambling, um, which is for your sake, if that happens. But I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities in even adding more of an ability for folks to be in space, where there's a void right now without the sensory, without getting overwhelmed by the noise and um, the sort of anxiety that it keeps you from reading where you're at in the landscape. Um, Very interesting place in our landscape, and to position your body in the city.
You want me to go?
Yeah. Go first.
Um, I think it's really important to look at the fabric of the neighborhood around in a fine grained manner. So, can you hear me? I'm about to grab that wireless right behind Sally. Um, uh, so that you're really paying attention to what's there today, right? On either side. So we have this I-5 scar that runs through the city. It's created this canyon between First Hill and Capitol Hill and downtown. But around the edges of that, right, people are living, there's businesses, right? There's things happening. And so to pay attention to those edges and then expand on the good things that are happening around those edges and bring that into the space. I think those are, when you do that exercise, you discover all sorts of great things. I naturally default to the Pike Place Market. Right? Everybody goes and they know that there's fish and there's flowers. But I'm willing to bet that everybody here that goes to the market regularly has a different little favorite spot, right? It's either, for me, for many years, it was Mo Betta Shoes down on Western Avenue. I don't know how many of you have been to Mo Betta Shoes. So this was Walter. He was a cobbler, and he made the most beautiful boots. But he only made boots for people that needed them. He would not make me a pair of boots. I went in there one day and I was like, Walter, I would like to have you make me a pair of boots. And he looks down at my feet and says, what's wrong, Ben? You can't buy normal shoes? So it's those sort of really unique components, right, that make an incredible neighborhood. So finding those pieces around the edges and bringing that into the design exercise and bringing that forward into the future space.
I think for me, I think a lot about the ability to connect neighborhoods. And I see a lot of people who live in certain neighborhoods that feel like maybe Boren Avenue or sometimes Madison is a, a obstacle for going from one neighborhood to another safely, particularly as a pedestrian, particularly as a cyclist. And I think when we look at what the potential is for what we can create, it's really a connection, and particularly to kind of provide an opportunity to rise up and elevate certain neighborhoods that are often overlooked because they've been kind of sectioned away or closed off. So one of the things I think particularly comes to mind is I'm working a little bit on the sub area planning, looking at First and Capitol Hill. And so often people are talking about how difficult it is if you work at the hospital on Pill Hill to find a way to cross the street safely, grab lunch, go back to work, or find a nice place to sit. A lot of people think Freeway Park is perhaps a nice place to have a picnic, but getting there is challenging with the way that the infrastructure is set up. So, really taking this opportunity to look at how we can create safer passageways for people who want to be on foot, not always driving. How we can really take a look at connecting the CID a little bit more into other neighborhoods throughout the city so they can benefit a little bit more in greater ways with the wealth that we currently see in our city that often passes them by.
Great. Did you?
Oh, I was looking behind you.
Oh,
Sorry. It's kind of like, yeah,
so,
Mike.
as we're thinking about this great vision and what this space could be, it's very exciting all to think about all the opportunities, all the connections, everything you're saying. I love the idea of perceiving the bluffs, connections. We're really just at the very beginning of this process, right? WashDOT, as John mentioned, is just beginning their I-5 master plan from Canada to Oregon. And the eventual design of this needs to fit within that master plan. So while it's too early to start planning what the I-5 lid could be, it is really the right time to define what the vision is and what a lidded I-5 could achieve, a lot of what you've just mentioned. So with that in mind, and maybe Ben, I'll have you start with this one if you're comfortable with it. As we think about on this course of this very long project and having a strong vision, what does a urban design vision for a lidded I-5, what is that? Not only in what the particulars of it are or in the concept of it, and what do we hope to achieve with a vision to help us make progress towards lidding I-5?
So that's a very large question. So I'll start at the macro, right? Very simply, it's a grand vision. And I don't use that just as a simple way to define it, but it's probably why most of us are here. like to be part of something that has impact. We like to be part of something that's going to make a difference in our city. It's going to improve our lives and the lives of our neighbors in some material way. And so that's sort of the sense of grand. And I think all of us have a notion that this project has that potential, right? It can really transform our city and place in our city that's really defined by one modality today, and that's freeway. So I think you sort of start there. And then, I quickly go to the micro. And within that vision, how do you define, articulate, and talk about the moments? How are each of us going to experience this space? And you pick out the moments that actually have deep personal resonance for as broad a group of people as possible. And I see a dear friend here in the back, Mr. Foster. You'll remember this. Um, uh, James Corner, in the early planning stages of the Overlook Walk, talked about the get down, talked about getting down and touching the water. For me, that resonated, right? That gesture. And so I think for us to identify within that grand vision, what are those moments? What are those gestures that resonate in a personal way? I think that's really important in that vision.
Uh, there's so much richness and inspiration in what's here. And I probably don't need to say that to this room. These are people, I mean, I recognize a lot of faces here too, people who know this city so well. Um, when I think of an emphasis or a starting point or a sort of frame of mind to approach something like this, to end up with something completely unique and transformative, I actually think about really digging into what's already there around this footprint, and what is it that's being interrupted or running up against this void. And this, it's really also kind of a landform. It's a canyon, but it emanates things that repel activity and then do interrupt the city and access. So understanding, and I think this relates to what Donna was saying earlier, really understanding the richness and the character of what's there and the systems, whether it's water, ecology, people, culture, architectural character, each of those cross streets, which end up sort of making a bias in the way they cross I-5 in some areas. So you really hit all of the directions. You really end up being prompted to look at all of our downtown and central city streets in that area if you look at that transect and the surrounding blocks. So I think this could be a really great prompt for us as a city to learn together about who we are and what this place is, and come together around the learning process that would end up producing something to connect them that's very relevant and vibrant.
I think earlier on we talked a little bit about the comp plan and just how we're looking at upzoning, and how one of the major complaints we hear from folks from different neighborhoods is that while we look at putting housing really close to transit, we also run the risk of putting a lot of affordable housing next to high traffic areas. And I think this project gives us the opportunity to actually create equitable, affordable housing really close to something that could be really beautiful, could be an open space, could be green, and maybe might kind of flip the usual perception that when you're really close to a highway, you're living in an area that is unhealthy and unsustainable. And I think the idea of also creating an opportunity for people who have normally been pushed aside and put into areas that are unsafe to actually have the premium spaces and to enjoy living that's close to transit, very walkable, good for biking, good for family activities, and start to see our city maybe expand from the inside out in that direction.
Love that.
So I think in order for a vision to really be successful, it has to make this transition from a dream, from the big vision into reality. And so I'm curious what you all think are the qualities and characteristics of a vision to achieve that, to be actionable, and to inspire the necessary political will and action to make it happen.
You want me to? This is not actually what the vision should include, but I think it's something for all of us to carry, and that's patience. You know, I go back to another friend here in the audience who was unpacking their office many years ago and had all these files and was wondering what to do with them and wanted some of them digitized. And mentioned that some of the early planning meetings for Allied Arts might be in those files. And I said, well, I'll digitize your files if I can have a copy. And these notes went back 20 years to sort of the early genesis of an idea, 20 years. Right? I mean, for those of us that are old now, 20 years is not such a long time, but it's still 2 decades. And so I think patience is important in a vision. In tandem with that, and I don't mean this to be a direct contradiction to what I just said, but also to have components and agility. So while you have patience for the whole vision, the grand vision, you have components that if the moment comes forward, you can move very quickly with. So you can take one piece and say, we can realize this component right now. It's an early phase and it feeds the larger grand vision. So I think those are sort of two thoughts.
I think I would point to also messaging, getting everyone on board,
Yeah.
pushing it forward, and making sure that the people that are propelling the project aren't just the people involved with the project, but that we do a good and better job of spreading the word so that people understand what we're working on doing and understand how they can have a voice in what the end product looks like, and also how we can kind of leverage this to um, make Seattle a leader in how we address creating more green space, making more public life realm a part of the fabric of the city, maybe using the opportunity to revive some small business activity and bring more public folks out into the public so that there is an increased sense of safety and viability and we're attracted to certain areas where we see more people, we see more activity, and we kind of come out of the isolation that I think has been uh, byproduct of the pandemic.
I think from the perspective of the role that I might usually have on a project like this, not that I've done a ton of them, uh, it is important in terms of knowing that you're coming up with something that is actionable and the rubber's going to hit the road and it's going to keep going. This sounds like an impractical answer, but I think the storytelling part of it, and this meshes in a little bit with what Donna was saying, the storytelling part of it, that making sure that it's not just an applied concept or this is going to be really cool or really fancy or big or it's going to be the first this, that it's really about us and this place and the community. And if we're all part of actually learning things that we might not have known before this project was a hosting space for this, about each other, about this part of our shared ground of the city, and then the story of the vision, that does need to be converted into some kind of form and drawings and something um, that has a character to it that's artistic and interpreted, but it needs to all come from that. And I think when it does, there's a natural, people remember it better. It feels familiar because people were involved in learning together, the inspirational and informing factors that, drove that vision. Um, that's the ideal, and I think that's what a lot of us that might be in the design position on projects like this are really striving for, in overlapping creativity with um, kind of a little bit more of a nonfiction summary or cliff notes of conversations that you're wanting to imbue into that, the creative aspect of the vision.
And I love that you called it components and agility. And I think any vision really needs something to keep the momentum going. So, as you think about that, what are those first, second, third catalyst projects or early implementation projects that could help this vision move forward?
Yeah, there's a number of things you can watch for. I think at times there's cues you can pick up from the surrounding neighborhood, and those can either be threats to something that's going to get lost, or a need that you can fulfill. And for some reason, and maybe it's because Mark Reddington's like right in my eyesight right here. Um, I've been thinking about the intersection of Pine and Boren.
Hmm.
I go through that corridor frequently, and I've watched that intersection slowly respond to what's happened with the convention center. So the convention center is not just this box, right? It's a beautiful vessel that actually encourages those inside to look out and engage and view the city in different ways. And one of those views is back up to Capitol Hill. But the bike path has changed at that intersection, but that's it, right? There's another visionary I can see right here, someone who invested in Melrose Market, and all of us started thinking about market to market. I believe Shannon, you had an early role in sort of thinking about how that
That was way back.
how that market to market connection could happen. And I know Seattleites, I'm going to tread very lightly here, but I'm going to say it. This really cool donut company from Portland decided that's where they want to locate Voodoo Donuts. So, in that intersection, what can be done to amplify the response to the convention center, amplify what's happening in the neighborhood up the hill, enhance pedestrian connectivity, and make that intersection a moment, not just a pass through? So it's those sort of it can be the littlest gesture that can be the catalyst. And the reason, I think another reason I go there is you have to start doing something. Because if it stays as a concept, then that's the only place it lives in all of our minds, right? Ultimately, you have to step forward, make a change, and prove that this is the thing we all need.
That's a good answer. No pressure, but Donna, Shannon?
Ben, you kind of summed it up. I think
Yeah.
definitely it's super important with a project like this, if you are going to do a test area, to make sure that it's not a kind of one and done, or it's not a test area that's only, we did it on Saturday from 10 to 2. No one showed up, so we're not going to do it again. Or it was really great, we'll do it next year. But to really start pushing a little bit and seeing what it looks like when we do something consistently for a period of time, where we can actually start gauging, surveying, responding to how we see people interacting with the space and interacting with each other. And I think it's really important to take notes from that and not be so set in stone that we're not adding improvements, making observations, and trying to build something bigger, and to just really, like Ben said, keep going. It's got to be big, but it's got to start out as a really small kind of thought that we move forward on.
Sometimes it's just experiential activities too to help people see what the land really is from a different perspective. And a lot of people do walk Pike and Pine streets between Capitol Hill or the Pike Pine neighborhood and the waterfront. But, there are those moments when you're talking to somebody about that and you realize this whole this whole town is a hillside waterfront town.
Mm.
And the Melrose Market is actually just a few blocks from the water. And because of I-5 and the sensory effect it has on us, it exaggerates the perceived distance and obstacle to get there, even though it doesn't really affect your grade, the grade of what you're walking when you're on a sidewalk. And I remember talking to Annie and Daniel of Lead Pencil Studio about this years ago. Some of you may remember that. But they had this notion where they realized they were at a friend's apartment that was near Melrose Market, and he had a kayak, and they were like, well, you could put your kayak on over your head and like walk down the hill and put it in the water. And it's like, why does it seem like we can't do that? And then we were thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if Like, what if you just had a bunch of people do that one day? Like, would it make people like realize that, like, just even as a art demonstration or something? And then that kind of led us to think, well, why don't we have, like a hill climb, scramble, or run? Like, it would be kind of fun to just see how fast people could run up Pike Street across the freeway and just like shorten the distance and remind us of what's possible.
Mm.
And that's not a first module of a project, but it's the kind of thing that um, I've seen some communities do things like that. And we've done that on a few of our projects and other places or been part of that. And it does make a difference in what people can see, and that can help
Yeah.
make things happen.
Sign me up for the paddle down Pine, right? That sounds fun.
Yeah, Donnie, you spoke about messaging. And these are really fun ideas. I'm wondering if you have examples of how you connect these kind of short-term ideas or these experiential activities to the longer-term vision.
I think it's really important to create something that feels like you don't want to miss it.
Mm.
So a lot of it is, if you're going to do some programming, have some music of different genres, different age group appeal, get people there so that people are starting to think, oh, this is an activity that I can go and enjoy. And it was so great last time. I want to go back. I want to bring friends. I want to tell friends. The messaging campaign has to be serious. It's probably going to not be inexpensive, and it's got to be written into the budget as an important part of the program.
Mm.
We have to approach things like this where we're telling people that it's worth, coming from Shoreline, coming from West Seattle, coming from Eastern Washington, coming from the East Side to see what's happening and to make them really fun, inviting, and to kind of start rewriting the story of what it feels like to be in the center of the city at all hours of the day, enjoying outdoor space regardless of the weather. So I think the messaging is what connects the excitement about the project.
Um, Something I think that's worthwhile as an early exercise is working through what we call it. And I think there's some great PR minds in the room. It was great, Josh, to see you as I walked in. I-5 lid is the technical description, right? And there's a reason for that, because all the work that's been, or a majority of the work that's been done to date is the technical feasibility. How do we do this with the engineers? How much does it potentially cost? What's the return on investment? Where the housing goes? All those sort of technical things. But to spend time thinking about how do you define in a singular, easy to grasp name what the experience is in this place and what it means to all of us. And I think within that, it could change 4 or 5 times. I mean, I think we've all been a part of projects that started with the technical name. I mean, the Market Front project started as PC1 North. What's PC1 North? Parking and Commercial 1 North. That was the definition from the 1970s plan to develop the market. So I think there's a lot in the name, and so I think some time spent on that would be good.
Yeah, our part of the Big Dig League was called Surface Artery Southbound SASB, the community petition to have it renamed North End Parks. And, I think there is something relevant there, and that it goes back to that. Is it about the freeway, the identity of the freeway and the, mega project, or is it about the identity of what people are experiencing on the ground locally? Uh, and I think as far as connecting things like that to a project, it's probably integrating public activities and public, not just public outputting public information, but public experiences into the process, so that we're all, I think said this in the last answer, or maybe I already answered this one, but so the project can be a space for us to all learn together things we might not have known about this place in our community. That could be, we need something like that, or maybe to build upon what the waterfront has been doing. Um,
Well, I think maybe after the panel and after everyone's had another glass of wine, we should put a board up and everyone write the big name, big idea. I was thinking the big lid when you said the big dig. So you're sort of touching on process and inclusivity, and that's what I wanted to move to next. You know, the expanded Lit I-5 site extends from Thomas Street in South Lake Union, past the Convention Center and Freeway Park to Main Street in the CID. And it's a 24-acre study area connecting some of Seattle's biggest employment centers, the densest neighborhoods, centers for human and social services, where a number of our healthcare is located and centered, but also some of the historically most underserved neighborhoods. So this LID project will only happen if diverse communities surrounding it are invested in its outcomes and demand it to be built so that it's a benefit to everyone, right? So, with that in mind, understanding this really broad area and all the points at which it's touching, and similar to what Ben was saying about understanding the edges, how do we approach this process of developing a vision? Not even developing what the plan is, but developing a vision that's inclusive of the wide variety of those who will be using this new space.
I'll jump in briefly and share that just from my perspective, ensuring that a project is truly anchored in community requires that you're not doing something to a community, you're actually building it with them. And so it's at times it's opening up your process in a way that could initially be uncomfortable. It's actively seeking out those individuals and entities within communities that this project could touch that could bring expertise that's far beyond the knowledge of any engineers, no offense, architects. That's really important. You have to embed your project in the community, and then you actually have to listen, right? There may be components of your project that you think are really sacred that don't mean anything and don't matter. And so you have to listen and actually bring the things that matter into the project itself. And so there's a really purposeful exercise there, and you have to do it early on. And as you identify those experts in the community, they run the whole journey, right? They're an integral part of the whole project team from start to finish.
I think it's important when we look at projects that are so large that we value people who come to a project without experience and maybe you know, having an experience, but maybe not a degree, or work at a place that might be the builder, so that we're actually making sure that we include and listen to community. I think particularly a project like this, it's important to not make sure that we don't continue to have separate neighborhoods along this lid, but actually create some sense of connectivity and inclusion, welcoming, and the idea that maybe a collaborative approach to how we engage and build this project is how we end up with something that feels good to everyone and keeps people moving in a flow on what we call the lid, instead of feeling like, well, I just hang out in the lid in my neighborhood, or I use it only for this purpose, but to actually invite people to see it as something transformative within our city.
Mm.
We've been working on a project in the Hunters Point Bayview neighborhood and south of San Francisco since 2016, and it started out as a waterfront project, toxic cleanup. It had been chain linked off from the beautiful community up the hill that's mostly public housing that had been cut off from the waterfront. So the diagram of a community that sort of had a wall next to it was similar, and a generation or two that didn't know what it was like to be able to walk to the water that they look at from their neighborhood. Um, the framework that a partnership of SFRPD and APRI, the Philip Randolph Institute, developed for that project is called the Equitable Development Plan. And there's been others that cities have developed for their parks departments, but this is the first one in the world, apparently. And we don't take credit for this. This is our client and the community. It's the first one that was developed for a specific project. So it's the Equitable Development Plan for India Basin Shoreline Parks, which are now called the waterfront parks. And it has completely shifted our worldview as a firm. Um, the community stakeholders are paid partners with us on the team, and they are truly co-designing with us. They defined what the project priorities are, interacting with the community and with community members on the team. And then every single thing we did on the project was run through that filter to make sure that the community's priorities were met. And they were jobs, education, opportunity, things along that line. So then you are forced to think, well, how does a park, in this case, a park with a few small buildings, um, elevate folks' access to education, elevate folks' safety around the water, all sorts of things. And we learned so much from that. And that framework, they're hoping that it'll sort of be an open source framework for other large long-term projects around the country.
Hmm.
So I just throw that out as a case study, and learning as they've gone.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'd love to hear from each of you, what are some other ideas for how we can hear other voices? Many of us in here are designers and have probably our typical toolkit of community engagement. But as you're pointing out, this is such a broad area. There's so many different potential users of this space, so many potential different programs here. It's not just about open space and park space, it's about, development opportunities. So, what are some other ways we can think about engaging the public?
I think it's important when you have community meetings to make sure that you've gotten the message out in multiple languages, that you're considering families, that it's a big deal to take a night off and come to a community event, make sure the flyer is informative, welcoming, inviting them, make sure that they know if they can't attend, that they can still be heard, provide snacks, provide daycare, provide transportation, things that make someone I think we do those things to make sure that we're covering our bases in a lot of ways. Like we've provided these things to make it easier for you to get here. But I think another purpose it serves is it's so important to us that you're here, that we've provided those things. And I think drumming that down and just making sure that people that are there not only feel welcome, but their comments come up.
Mhm.
We heard from so and so that they really are worried about this intersection. We want to make sure we keep talking about that until we've resolved it or until we decide we can't resolve it, but we tried, so that people don't feel like they're just showing up, so that planners and organizers can check a box.
Mm.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize and amplify the comments that Shannon and Donna just made around the importance of investing not only the time but the resources to create time for people that may not have that privilege. Like those are super critical components, and I think we probably don't spend quite enough time uh, uh, including that and thinking about how much that creates that space for true collaboration. A sort of interesting example popped into my head, and I was thinking back to my years at the Santa Monica Pier. And Cirque du Soleil wanted to come back to the pier and use the most important resource for the pier, which was their parking lot, for their tented structure. It was the 20th anniversary of Cirque du Soleil, and it was the year of the 100th anniversary of the pier. And so it seemed like a no-brainer that they would come back, but nobody wanted them because it took parking. And they did something really, really smart. They identified an individual. This is a woman named Karen Gay. She moved to Santa Monica. She lived there for almost 2 years, and she embedded in the community. She got to know everybody. She participated in the Chamber of Commerce. She went to the business mixtures. She went to the neighborhood meetings, right? Knew everyone. And so I think for a project of this scale, how do you apply that? I mean, how do you apply that approach? And the fundamental lesson I take away is the importance of relationship, right? We often get hyper obsessed on our process. Did we reach 30 people? Did we reach 100 people? Do we do our outreach? And I think what's really important, even more important than that in many ways, is did we build the relationships? And building those relationships, you deepen the commitment and passion for the project. So investing in those person-to-person relationships, however we can, I think could really help.
So, the lid has the potential of creating a lot of really needed open space within this densest part of the city, where there really is a shortage of open space, and also where there's the highest density of residents in the city. But how else could this lid serve some of the most pressing needs of Seattle as a whole, and with this range of communities that it's touching?
It's not open space, I'm out. No.
Yeah, I think, and this is something that I think likely will be hotly debated as this project progresses. And it's why I say will be hotly debated is it's the value. It's like the fundamental cost of delivering more land. But I think it's safe to say, we definitely need more open space, no doubt. But we also need more land to provide the things that we are having trouble providing now, like housing. And I can tell you, I was part of that aforementioned very technical feasibility study. So I know that it's still very expensive land. And if that land's not free to the housing developer, there's no way the housing developer can afford to build on it if you're looking at it from a market rate perspective. But I think that's a need in our city. And I go back to what we've learned in the last 3 years. We all know we need more space, right? We want more density for sure. That creates a vibrant city and vibrant spaces and places, but we need more space. And so I think that's not a new idea or a different idea, but I think it's a really important component of the project.
I think it's important to identify that once you create space, it can have multifaceted uses. So it can appeal to a housing need, maybe not on the lid itself, but you know, very, very close to it in proximity to it. It can provide activities through programming. It can provide, more bike lanes, more maybe smaller types of small business, maybe food trucks instead of restaurants, maybe, pop up vendors instead of hard brick and mortar stores, and trying to do things that make it active and appealing while still respecting that we've created open space that should have. In some places, maybe a meditative quiet quality, maybe some water qualities, things like that, that they can coexist the way many different personalities can coexist in a city, and approaching it that way where it reflects the many and not like a single-minded purpose, I think is one of the best ways to approach it.
N- And I was kidding when I said I meant I probably shouldn't lead to answer the question about something other than open space. But when look at this piece of our city, this piece of ground, it's really about taking a place that right now is a back edge to two, there's two sides, and then it feels like we have this back edge that creates this negativity or absence where there should be a center. So we're taking an edge, turning it into a center. A great central spatial experience or experience of feeling like you've reached a healthy center of something that doesn't have a sort of like when you see for landscape architects, if you see a shrub and then it's like died out in the middle, it's just so disappointing. You want that to be the densest part. In a city or a neighborhood, that can be the most vibrant series of blocks that are lined with wonderfully textured and intricate storefronts and really engaging activity on the street. That requires subsidy today. We know that retail is and those kinds of experiences don't just happen. So whether that's the kind of heart that we're going to put back with this project, or whether um, the identity and experience of center is because we've carved out a central opening, like the tradition of carving out a central square or a central park. Think that either method is super intriguing, or whether it's a mix of both, all require a lot of public and likely private investment and then ongoing curation and investment and care.
Mm.
So
That's great. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So this is going to take time. We're talking about developing a vision, and then we need that vision to catch fire and to inspire action. Who is the connective tissue and champion that will help make this happen? Who, and when I say who, I don't mean the one individual, but who are the players? Who are the various team members? We're talking about storytellers, designers, marketers. Who could be that team?
oh, so who would be on the team?
Well, who are the champions? I just think
Mhm.
this takes a lot of energy and patience, as has been said. So, who do we imagine as a champion?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick, and I'm sorry I keep doing this, but I'm so excited to be out here and see so many incredible people. So I'm going to call out one individual to talk about this important, and that's Sally Bagshaw, who's sitting right in front of me here. Round of applause. And you know, Sally represents one of the most important ingredients in a major undertaking like this, and that's the political will. You have to have that, and you have to have that political will at the highest and most influential places that you can reach. And you know, they have to believe in this project. And you know, I can tell you that several of the projects I was involved in on the waterfront wouldn't have happened without the belief of Sally Bagshaw. So those individuals are really important. And as you're building that political will, and this goes back to the importance of engagement, real engagement, right? Relationships with a broad and diverse community, is you're building that stakeholder group, right? It's momentum that has to be maintained, and momentum is a broadening exercise, right? Momentum's not a single, you know, holder of a single vision. It's a broadening and opening and welcoming going forward, and that's what allows the project continue to thrive and grow.
I think Ben's mentioned the idea of political will kind of driving it. And I think it's almost as though we could put together, like a pot of the ingredients, that being a very integral one, the whole idea of a public private partnership. I think as we embark on a project like this that we know is going to take a long time, if we don't have ways to mitigate the construction, you're going to start to lose the fan club along the way. And you want to make sure not to do that. So we also have to think about, what kind of band-aids do we need to put on the project while we're doing it? Some of that is going to be done by the marketing team, but some of it is going to be done by, simple things that say, if this road is closed, let's open up this one. If this road is for cyclists and this road is for automobiles. So we are moving forward without angering people as we go along, taking a look at the team. Right now, we've got architects, we've got designers, we've got engineers, we've got politicians, we've got, the public sector, where's community. Make sure that as we're building this out, you start to put all the people, all the components together to make sure you've got that shared thinking to create the project.
Uh,
You're
I
gonna
think
say landscape architects?
that's all I was going to say. That's all you need. Uh, I think I was, I'm agreeing with everybody. And ideally, you have this sort of sandwich of one thing we don't want to do is pretend that it's just grassroots and there's nobody sticking their neck out. That needs to be an unpopular boss at times or champion. And then there's people championing all sorts of things and they have to kind of focus on their thing to get it through, sometimes with friction with other things. And if we're all really conflict avoidant, like I am, nothing gets done. So ideally, there's both a few faces that are leaders, politicians, folks that are willing to say, this is my personal cause and I am leading this and I'm calling some shots uh, to make to to advocate for this. That may not always be consensus. At the same time, in the sandwich, I don't know whether it's the upper or lower piece of bread, but in Seattle, there's also the grassroots, and there's all of us, and it has to have that layer of popular support and really generation of the energy. And then the designers are there, but what we don't want is just the face of the project being people, no matter how enthusiastic and heartfelt. And I've been in those shoes, but you don't want the face of the project to be people. It's like, this is my job and I'm trying to do my job. And they're the ones answering, or that, because it's different. And that starts to raise the risk, if those are the folks that are the face of the project, that people will get disenchanted or lose a little bit of trust or momentum. So I don't want to end on the don't do this, but let's picture the sandwich, because I think that would be ideal for this project.
All right. I think at this point we can open it up for some Q&A. There's a microphone, but people can yell it. I know you have to step out.
I'll be quick. Just two things. One, there's a precedent for this. Way back, we had Open Space 2100, if anybody
Mhm.
remembers that.
Yes.
And we broke down the watersheds. I and another guy had the two different downtown areas. We buried I-5. When we at Allied Arts that we had involved an east-west connections. And we looked at different waypoints along the waterfront and how they would connect once the waterfront was done upland. By the way, I'm Paul Crane, landscape architect. Well, I think we need to go a lot further. Next cultural transect point would be the Lid Park, continuing on up Pike to Cal Anderson. And the third, if we don't put one intermediately between that, would be Lake Washington. We are in unceded lands of the Duwamish, and this goes back to the portage issues, which they portaged between the Sound and Lake Washington. This would be a portage trail, and there is your demographic that you might want to tie in with the tribes on this and this whole idea, and set it an idea for the Lid Park that would be part of our waterfront. As you realize, they wanted, or if you remember, they wanted to have an area to pull canoes up and uh, as a landing as part of the waterfront design. So I think that that's a concept you might want to consider. Of this is a larger thing than just a waypoint or a design for I-90 Lid. It's one of the cultural waypoints
Mhm.
of First Nations.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Great.
anybody else?
Great point. There's someone behind you. Yeah. And I think that touches on what Ben said about
luck.
edges, the importance of edges.
Hello. So I have a question. Might be a little bit premature, but has there been any thought about the architectural design of the housing that's going to go on the lid? Whether it's going to follow more like Cap Hill or like the downtown slough kind of vibe?
That's a great question. The early feasibility study really focused on what it would take from an engineering perspective to support that housing, and then rough estimates on the volume of housing, not really the typography, right?
Yep.
But I think, what does it match Capitol Hill? But I think your question really goes to the core of the importance in the design exercise, in my mind, and again, this is something that could likely be debated, but to not create something entirely foreign, right? You're not dropping in something new in this space that's unlike everything around it, at least again from my perspective, but it's subject, I think, to robust debate. But how you're bringing those edges in. I mean, Shannon, you were talking a lot about how you bring those edges in. So, in a roundabout, winding way to answer your question, personal opinion, it should respond to both of those spaces, downtown, Capitol Hill, First Hill, and merge those.
And we should be aware that there's some architecture along the freeway, and there was in the project in Boston as well, that actually has responded to the presence of the freeway. And we wouldn't want to further that, because it's sort of this phantom limb of turning its back or armoring up, blanking out. I mean, we can see it when we look there, and it's something you don't necessarily think about. And then you put the land back, and it's like, why is that facade so brutal? So thinking about how much of what we have around the edges may be responding to something that wouldn't be there anymore, and then what predated it, and which influences. Maybe there's, again, there's different ways people could creatively interpret things, but just being aware of that.
Anyone else?
What you just said, Shannon, reminds me of a moment. We were at the Pike Place Market PDA. Come up to the market. Yeah, yeah. I'm just filling in space here. And they had a presentation from WashDOT on the demolition of the viaduct. And we had a board member, Jerry Kumata, who got very, very quiet. And the board chair turned to him and said, Jerry, why are you so quiet? He said, I designed the market parking garage. I never imagined that the west facade would be exposed.
Uh-oh. Yeah, that's great. Great analogy.
Hi, thanks. I fear I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. Uh, One of the things that I've followed lidding I-5 for a little while, and I won't claim any deep knowledge of the plans, but also I'm going to do a thing. So basically, it's this and then this, right? This is the freeway right now. Does the lid look like this or like this? I mean, is it also a slopey thing all the way
Right.
down, or is it just above the freeway with a flat area? The reason I ask it is this isn't just like to do weird hand gestures. It's basically, as has been pointed out here, Seattle is a slope. It's a constant slope, and it's a problematic slope, especially if like every park that I've ever sort of gone to a meeting about kind of forgets that A, it's slopey, and B, it's rainy. It would be cool to have a large flat area in the middle of the city. Has that actually been considered, or are we just following the land before the I-5 cut?
You know, the
Sorry, long question.
feasibility study. Oh, are you ready for, I mean, it's going to be figured out. And I think that's going to be a really, really fascinating aspect of the solution. If you level it out, you're going to have walls somewhere. And as a landscape architect, I don't know if it's just because I'm a landscape architect. I fear blank walls. And I also fear lots of mitigation for slopes as well, but it is a slope, it is a hillside. And so there's really interesting design potentials by embracing that. It's also very interesting to think about terracing, but how many cities have a central space or feature that is also something that is like a big theater that faces you toward the water and sort of assembles everybody to understand that we are on a hillside, and that's part of what makes the city beautiful and interesting. So I think it's something to think about. The feasibility study does have thoughts and analysis about the differential of height on either side of the void in different areas, and shows different profiles that could be considered, and looks at the pros and cons of those. But you had a more specific question you were asking, weren't you? Or
Sorry, can I
suggesting?
also throw one more thing into the discussion, which is this is a large area that could start to sort of mitigate the fact that Seattle's on a slope, but is trying to be a pedestrian, walkable, high walk score kind of city. Many parts of, like, let's say, consider First and Fifth, or Western and Fifth, right? To get from one to the other, there are a lot of buildings that have internal escalators or other mitigations, right? This is an opportunity now to take two fairly, an elevation and sort of reduce the impact of it across multiple, at least Pike to
Yeah.
Pine to Thomas, a fairly large amount. So does that fit into the
Well, we've had a
architecture
few
or the feasibility?
regrades in our city. We've had a few regrades to try to address that. I think so the outcome could be more level space, and there is value in that to have contiguous or adjacent level space or programming of a certain scale. It's usually about achieving that scale of contiguous level space. That contiguous level space would likely be detached. In every scenario I could picture, on from one side or the other, because we at some point need to connect to the existing, grade of the city. But I think that there's probably a lot of people that would be interested in the opportunity of having so much contiguous space as sort of a blank slate.
Yeah.
And that's one direction.
Yeah, and
to look at.
you actually made me think about a moment, and this is part of, sometimes the clues are already there on how you can start to address that grade change. And I think of my favorite moment in Freeway Park. And if you haven't been to this particular moment recently, I encourage you to do so, although be careful. I don't think there's any way this could get permitted today, but at the northwest end of Freeway Park, there's a canyon, like an actual rock canyon, and you can climb out on the cliffs and you can climb down into these pools and you can sort of walk up through this little, like, it's amazing. It's still, I marvel every time at, like, I don't think they would let me build that today as much as I would love to.
Yeah.
But I think moments like that, like, how do we get creative about solving? There's also stairs, and on the other side, there's a sidewalk that ramps at grade. But my point is, you can have these moments and interventions that are highly unusual and unexpected. And again, if you haven't been to that moment in Freeway Park, I encourage you to go take a look at it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I liked what Shannon said earlier about there's opportunities in slopes. Yeah.
First off, thank you for the conversation tonight. A lot of really good discussion. I'm Kim Selby, urban designer at NBBJ. Know a lot of you from different pasts. There's been a couple of really intriguing just pieces I want to comment on. One, the idea that it doesn't have to be the same all along, right? There could be different moments and the connectivity in the different pieces. And I would hate to lose this big idea because we think we have to do it all at once. So the idea if we can do pilot projects or in between or phasing this in such a way, again over freeway, I don't know how, but do it in such a way that we don't lose pieces of this because we're trying to do all of it. I also love the idea, Ben, about naming this thing. Uh, Bellevue's got us on a little bit of a head because their big idea, the Grand Connection, and trying to cross. And is it a land bridge? Is it a space? Is it, they're still
That's
trying
right.
to figure out too. But I think we have a little bit of a sister city rivalry here of let's do these great things, but let's do it in such a way that we all benefit and that we all really are reconnected and not just competing against one another. So thank you for the conversation tonight.
Thank you. It's really great to bring up the ground connection in that process.
Excellent.
I hope I get to ask a question.
I thought you were
Uh,
going to answer this.
Thank you very much. A wonderful discussion. One thing I guess I was surprised not to hear, and I'd care for your reflection on this, is the environmental aspects of this. Because on one level, you can obviously heal a terrible condition. I often joke with the Waterfront for All campaign. Their tagline was, "Come touch the water." No one wants our tagline to be, "Come touch the freeway," right? So there's the immediate remediation, but what's the potential for capturing air pollution and recycling it through the necessary smoke evacuation we'll need for capturing stormwater? How does that kind of narrative get people excited and figure into a vision on a scale that's larger than anything in some ways that Seattle's ever dealt with before? So have that be a really big rallying cry.
Well, the feasibility study does have some really great thinking and quantified metrics modeled out about some of those things. I mean, I tend to get more excited about the living stuff, the dirt, the insects, the plants. We know that a 3 meter by 3 meter patch of native Achillea millefolium, if you put that anywhere in the city, isolated from anywhere else, it's like immaculate conception. You will have, and this has happened over and over again, and now we're confident promising to people, you will have great golden digger wasps and grass carrying wasps and bee wolves, which are wasps that catch bees and carrying them around like a log after they paralyze them. You'll have all sorts of really interesting insects there the first year. So if that is a minimum size for native, I worry about the word biodiversity because it gets misused a little bit, but for actually connecting to our ancient ecology here, then imagine what we could do with this much square footage of dense native habitat. And it does not need to be immediately reforested. It could be something with what we know now about successional planting. It can also be a really great opportunity if it's of a certain size to do something that's really needed in our city, we're behind on, which is training, particularly youth, but really anybody, training folks to garden and manage dynamic native horticulture. We have a lot of gardening talent in the city, but and I'm friends with a lot of them. I had to really blunderingly teach myself from growing these plants from seed, even what they looked like, because they aren't in nurseries. We're way behind. So I think an ecological focus on the horticulture, building upon what the waterfront has established, uh, could be significant and also serve as a great training ground and incubation space that could move the needle on what people are planting in their yards and the patchwork of the rest of the city. So it'd be great to see.
If I can, I want to take, John, just a moment and flip that 180 degrees.
Uh-oh.
And full disclosure, I ride my bicycle everywhere I can. I love riding bikes. It's just been part of my life since I was in grade school. But I also love cars. I have a 7-speed fossil fuel burning rig, and I love driving down I-5, and
That's
I like
brave to
to
say.
go fast. Just a question, sort of a notion, sort of a tickle to put out there. How do we incorporate the celebration of that infrastructure into this project? It's not going away. The cars may go underneath. We're all still going to need freight. We're going to be driving either, whether it's electric vehicles, if you like electrical vehicles, that's not going away. But how do we incorporate the celebration of that? I love watching cars. I like looking at cars. Is there something there that also brings in some excitement from the federal transportation network, right? The I-5 is not entirely this scar we want to get rid of, but just a notion, just a 180-degree like little tickle. Is there a way that you can celebrate that too? Maybe not.
Well, I think there's something to be said for honesty. So, at LID, there's this idea that we kind of make things go away by paying so much money to cover them up. And we can't solve things that way anymore. I mean, and I've been involved in some of these projects where every square foot was so expensive. So, is there a little bit of a hybrid approach where we're being really strategic about where we invest that money? Where do we need to cap things, and where maybe do we want to still know that it's there? Because being honest with ourselves, there's a little bit of an analogy with the clear cuts and the roadside buffers. And I don't think this project would remove from our minds our awareness of our car dependent society and built environment. But I think there's something to that. And there's a little portal in the Halperin Freeway Park design that a lot of us know about where you can you think you're in this kind of Planet of the Apes canyon, and you suddenly are looking at the freeway under your feet, and it's pretty cool. Something to think about.
I just want to name artists as also like really important folks to engage with and be in conversation with. Your background in sculpture speaks to that as well. Just putting those folks that Seattle has a rich history of arts integration and public art. I would like to see that permeate this space as well.
Super, super important.
Artists.
I
That's
didn't
really
mention it. I probably take it for a granted in my brain, but absolutely part of that early engagement. And artists often come up with solutions to things that none of us can imagine because they've allowed their brains to work outside of the constructs that many of us carry around day to day.
It's a little tall. When I think about this project, I think about I've lived in New York for a few years, and I think about what New York has done with its spaces and how it utilizes those spaces. And um, like for instance, in the summer, the city of New York fully utilizes every single park. It seems like every single day, and outdoor movies and farmers markets, and it just goes on and on and on. And it really impacts the identity and the feeling of being a resident of New York.
and they utilize those spaces in so many ways that are more than like you go beyond what you think of as being a park. So like, and I'm thinking about like the Millennium Park in Chicago as well, with the Bean and the orchestra space, right? And I'm just curious, yeah, like thinking beyond park and beyond sort of incidental to park, how do we use it to kind of define the identity of the city?
How do we use the lid open space to help define the identity of the city? Yeah.
Like, Millennium Park, we did a little corner of it, the Lurie Garden. And one of the things I notice helps it, you feel like you are in Chicago, but you're also in a park. And I mean, that really sounds obvious, but the park is not designed to separate itself from the city. The main pathways of the park are extensions of the street grid. So it's a very self evident way of reinforcing that this is Chicago. And the park is just as much part of the city as all the buildings of the Lou Bar that are pressed up against the glass around the edges of Montgomery Ward's building restriction and Grant Park that somehow managed to stick, that when similar restrictions didn't stick in other cities. I think being okay as as if there is open space and this is green space, it can be a respite, but can also be of the city. And we're I think we're just getting to that point collectively in our culture here that landscape and nature isn't necessarily something that you see if you drive for 45 minutes or an hour and then you come home. And don't get me started on what the yards look like here. There's nothing um, from this place. And so sometimes, and I know that people that move here, people in our office who've just moved here, and they're like, now I see how beautiful this place is, or I got to go hiking and see what this place is. This is why I'm here. And I'd love for more people to have that experience that you're talking about of just like sitting in the middle of the city and saying, God, this is beautiful. I'm so glad I live here. And having that experience downtown without having to get in your car. There's no reason we couldn't have it. We just have to sort of envision it and feel confident that the city is beautiful, our landscape and nature is beautiful here, and we don't need to imitate other things or wall things off and create some new doohickey that's unto itself.
I do think one thing that is so great about Seattle are the different neighborhoods and the different feels of the neighborhoods. So then it makes me wonder if this lid is it its own neighborhood, and what is that feel of that neighborhood, or is it a whole bunch of neighborhoods, individual neighborhoods with their own feel?
So first, I want to thank all three of you, and also the people that are in this room. When you were talking about where's the enthusiasm and who's going to lead it, it's
This
in
is
this
it,
room.
right?
So I don't want for a second to think that we have to start over. I want to build on what we already have. But I do want to also remind us about all ages and abilities. We haven't talked about that at all tonight. Whatever we do, I want to make sure that people who have whatever kind of disabilities that they have, that they can enjoy this as well. And it's a big deal for me personally. I know many of you know my husband has muscular dystrophy, and it's gone from, it's a progressive disease. And so being able for him to be able to get here and see it is something really important to me personally. But I do want to just say thanks. This is so exciting to me. It's like Waterfront 2.0 because we're going to make this happen. And I really want to be alive to see it. So let's get going.
All right. I think it's probably hard to top that.
That's it.
So I'll just say thank you everyone for coming, and to be aware that the next Beer and Culture event is February 5th. It's about with a focus on building partnerships at Wing Luke Museum. Registration for that is now open, so encourage everybody to keep the momentum going and gather up again in February 5th. And then February 19th, urban connectivity at Town Hall. All right. So thank you.
Thank you.